BIA projections have already been bestowed upon half of the secondary. Let's get into the rest and see if the safeties can also live up to the best in America moniker. This is the Podcast Daily. It's Thursday. That's Bill Landis, and I'm Austin Ward, and our position preview is rolling right along. We talked about the cornerbacks in episode number 1 this week. There's more intrigue, I guess, at safety because there's a couple new faces. So that'll give us a lot more to talk about as we dive into a little spring ball look ahead at, let me think, a safety-driven defense, and it's important to the Buckeyes.
Yeah, and they got a pretty good group to drive the defense this year. I think more interesting, and not in the sense that like things are unsettled, but like you said, like there's some new faces. There's one very noteworthy new face at the at the safety position who we'll talk about. But I also think it's interesting because there are some, or at least there's one like older guy that like I'm not entirely sure how he fits in here. There's the Sonny Styles piece of this too that I think is interesting and might turn this into a quasi linebacker preview as well. We'll see where that goes, but it is regardless. I think of those questions, I suppose. It's an incredibly strong position group, I think. Some question of depth, maybe. Maybe not as much of a sure thing depth-wise as the corners, although the corners are pretty young after the top 3 too. But it's a really good group, and I think it's felt like it's been building toward this since Jim Knowles got here, and obviously infusing Caleb Downs into that equation takes it to a whole other level.
Yeah, after spending like, I don't know, all of 2023 being like, gosh, Bill, I don't know who plays where and why and how, and figuring out all the pieces and the rotation. This year feels like it should be more of a breather for me, although it might not be. I mean, I don't know the best way to decide whether Lathan Ransom should play Bandit or Caleb Downs should play there, or if they can both like just alternate and the Bandit and Adjuster can just rotate depending on whatever the situation is, which given the ability and the knowledge both of these players have of the position and the proven production for both of them, even in just 1 year for Caleb Downs, maybe there is a world where that sort of versatility and flipping the formation can exist in the secondary for Ohio State. I don't know. It seems like the pieces are a little bit more up in the air in terms of, we talked about, Jordan Hancock and the nickel and where that belongs and who should be out there and how much a little bit on Wednesday. Sonny Styles has played there. I guess he's going to be a factor in the cornerback conversation because of nickel. Safeties today, and then linebacker when we do that. It's like the Sonny Styles show, but it doesn't feel like there are any wrong answers for what Ohio State has to work with, and maybe that's the true benefit of this versatility and flexibility Ohio State has stockpiled here.
Yeah, it's just a matter of how they choose to deploy it. But I think the thing that Jim Knowles wants to do more than anything else is have an ability to disguise things. And I think he, no offense to Oklahoma State, he didn't have this when he was there. And even in previous years at Ohio State, I'm not sure that he had it quite to this extent in terms of like versatility and guys you can kind of move around the board to disguise things. Because I think you're right. I think Lathan Ransom and Caleb Downs can be interchangeable in those 2 deep safety positions. Sonny Styles, I think, can play back there. Even Jordan Hancock in a pinch, if he wanted to, I think could play back there. And if you get into a scenario where all 4 of those guys are on the field together, then like, I don't know, Jim Knowles can get crazy with it. He can probably do stuff he's never been able to do before. So I'm sure that's really exciting to him. And I'm eager to talk to him about that when we get to talk to him once spring practice opens, just how, and not that he's going to like give us the plan for what he wants to do, but just even the opportunity to kind of play around with that many different guys who can do a bunch of different things. I really do think is going to unlock even more for this defense, right? I think we all expect this defense to be like at worst top 5, top 10, but certainly in the conversation for best in the country. It would be disappointing if it wasn't. And that's just surely based off the talent they have coming back. But when you think about the options they could get into with scheme and disguise and maybe doing some different stuff with blitzing and all that kind of stuff, really it's whatever Jim Knowles wants it to be. I think it starts with this safety group because there's just like a handful of guys who can kind of play really anywhere on the defense.
Yeah, Ohio State and Jim Knowles talked about that a year ago. It's like, well, all these guys have the ability to play any spot at safety, and like we could do that with them at nickel if they wanted to as well. But it didn't. Watching it didn't really feel like that was entirely true.
Mhm.
And Josh Proctor had by far his best season and the biggest impact that he had in his career with the Buckeyes in year 6, and that was a tribute to a very, very good defense. But even with somebody with the athleticism of Sonny Styles, it didn't really feel like you could line him up anywhere and have him play his best football. We saw,
Sure.
some of those, plays late in the year, most notably in the Big House, where it's like that's maybe not the ideal situation, not where you want to line him up. Now, it doesn't mean that they aren't very good and that they can't be exceptional in one particular role, but neither one of those two guys just felt like, you don't miss a beat if you move them anywhere else. And I think Lathan Ransom actually does have that sort of flexibility in the secondary, and it just based off of 1 year of Caleb Downs, it seems like he may well be in that same boat.
Yeah, I think he definitely is. And I remember when Lathan first got to Ohio State, there wasn't so much conversation about like, can this guy play cornerback? But like, I kind of looked at him as a guy who had that skill set if you needed it, like an emergency situation. And obviously, he's a very good safety. Can play in the box, can cover. I think he cover most receivers, maybe not every receiver, but can cover most receivers. Can cover tight ends. Can cover running backs if you need him to. Has looked comfortable like playing the deep half. I know his preference is probably to play closer down to the line of scrimmage, but if you look at like the positional snap breakdowns on like Pro Football Focus, he spends just as much time playing deep as he does up near the line of scrimmage. And the same thing for Caleb Downs. Like those are the two guys when I say like they've never had it quite to this point. It's like, yes, you've had Lathan for a number of years now, but I don't ever know that his counterpart was really capable of what we're talking about. And Caleb Downs certainly is. So if you start with those two and then kind of work everything else around them, it's not really a bad place to start. If you're Jim Knowles, it's like, what are you working with? We have a 4-year starter who plays at like an All-American level when he's healthy, and then a 18-year-old who was an All-American in his first year at Alabama. So yeah, it's pretty good, but the room is interesting beyond those two. I think when you talk about ways the pieces can move around, like where some certain guys slot in.
Yeah, you talked about 4 names already, and that's leaving out Malik Hartford, who goes out there and starts a game in the Ohio State secondary as a freshman. In that first, in the first month of his career, essentially, he was making a lot of plays that we saw in those 2 open practices, and we were hearing his name a great deal. It's like, look out, this guy could start, and lo and behold, he did that. And he hit some obvious rough patches and went through some growing pains, and was out there for one play that Ohio State very much would have wanted to go differently again in the loss at Michigan. But that one play in particular, and the fact that he didn't remain a starter from September all the way through the end of December, I don't think should count against him or overshadow a lot of the really exciting things once he taps into a now full off season, another year in the system, another year of development. Like, he may not be in line for a starting job, and he may not get the same level of buzz in spring ball or in training camp in August. But this is, again, the reminder of the depth of talent and versatile athleticism that Ohio State has built here. Like, he shouldn't be dismissed out of hand. And again, if you're going to play 15 or 16 games, that, Lathan Ransom's dealt with injuries, a couple high-profile ones. There's nothing wrong with having somebody like Malik Hartford waiting in the wings.
No, I don't, and I don't think that Caleb Downs showing up and presumably playing the spot that we all had Malik Hartford penciled into before Caleb Downs' arrival should make people think that like Malik Hartford is getting derailed here in his development. I don't think that's the case. I think there was probably a reason to be somewhat skeptical of his ability to step into that spot in the first place. But he had some good moments when he was on the field last year, and we all know the buzz he was generating basically as soon as he got on campus last spring. But he also needed to develop physically. So he's gone through another winter conditioning. Like I'm curious to see what he looks like when we get out there for that first spring practice. And I also think he was put in probably some spots that don't necessarily gel with his skill set, like that Michigan game in particular. He was kind of like, I think it was a dime package. And I think he might have been playing in the slot. And it's like, I like Malik Hartford a lot. I don't necessarily want him playing in the slot. I want him playing deep middle or like a strong safety position, let him go up and play against the run. And I feel very comfortable with him doing that, and comfortable saying that he'll be a starter at safety probably in 2025. But I also think he's a key depth piece right now. And to your point, like if anything were to go awry at the safety position, I would think that he'd be the next guy up and is probably capable of playing either the bandit or the adjuster position. And while I would understand from his perspective, where it's like kind of a bummer that Caleb Down shows up and like maybe you thought you were going to start this year and now you're not. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world for a guy like Malik Hartford to get another year of development, play probably a lot of special teams, hopefully play in some blowouts or maybe rotate in a little bit with the starting defense and then be ready to go as like a third-year player starting full-time for the first time. I think that's still a perfectly reasonable career trajectory, even if he did have a lot of buzz as a freshman.
So when you're, talking about looking at the rest of that group in spring and some of the intrigue beyond just like that starters, where it feels like pretty safe to assume that we know what Ohio State's going to look like and how they're going to line up at the start of March. Like, what else makes it intriguing to you?
The guy I was alluding to earlier was Jihad Carter, who, when they brought him in from Syracuse, I just assumed was going to start somewhere on the back end of the defense. And he didn't. And we've talked about him a lot. Like he played all three safety positions at Syracuse. It's somewhat similar already to what Jim Knowles does. So I thought he could come to Ohio State and play any of the three safety positions in this defense. Now I feel a little differently about that because it seems like ideally they'd want more of a corner skill set to play the nickel, and that's not Jihad Carter. He's kind of a bigger guy, more of a traditional safety build. So he's probably either one of the two deep ones, or if you want to play like a bigger nickel against a run team, maybe you can do that. But it's odd to me that they brought in I think it was a 3-year starter at Syracuse, or at least a 3-year part-time starter at Syracuse, to come in and start, and then he didn't start, and now it doesn't seem like he's going to start again. So I'm wondering like where he's at, and not only in a depth chart, just sort of like in his own head. Like this has not gone the way that he expected when he decided to leave Syracuse to come to Ohio State. I still thought he was, or still think that he's a talented player based off what we saw at Syracuse, but I guess sometimes that change of scenery doesn't work out the best for everybody. So it would be a little odd to me if he does end up being mostly a reserve player for 2 years with the Buckeyes. But I have a hard time seeing it being anything other than that based off how things have shaken out this last year and a half.
Yeah, and a big part of that is just simply not being healthy. That's not Jihad Carter's fault. We were expecting when we got out there at the start of March last year, like, which position is Jihad Carter gonna start at? It wasn't like, can he, will he? When you make a move like that in the transfer portal, that's the expectation, that you go out and have an impact. And got out there at the start of camp and he wasn't starting anywhere. And he's like, okay, well, you have to learn, a new scheme. You have to transition to a new school. Ohio State's got to figure out the best way to use him. And then midway through camp, he goes down with a leg injury. It's like, okay, well, now that's a different thing. And I don't know how much that wound up impacting, him in terms of, did he ever get fully healthy? Did he ever get fully comfortable in the system? He had other injuries that he picked up. I believe once in October, got hurt on special teams. I think it was covering a kick. And just like, I don't know if we saw the best version of Jihad Carter last year. And there can be a number of factors in that. Maybe Ohio State just has a collection of 5 guys who are more talented than him at defensive back. Maybe he needs a year to get healthy, a year to understand the system. I don't know. Well, based on what we've seen, and we saw a lot more practices last March and April than we do any other time of the year, I felt like, wait, I don't think he can play nickel. It just doesn't seem like it fits. And a part of that is comparing him physically to Tanner McAllister getting basically every single rep there 2 years ago. And then in the middle of last season, Ohio State deciding, well, Jordan Hancock is the best nickel here. And both of those guys, as you said, Bill, have more cornerback style skills and coverage skills than I think Jihad Carter brings to the table. So you got to figure that part out. Jihad Carter has to figure that out. Like, the clock is ticking on his college career, and he's going to have to, everyone's going to have to make some hard decisions, but that does put him in a more interesting spotlight in March and April than certainly I would have expected.
Yeah. And like, if it works out that he is, content's not the right word, but it's just like he wants to be at Ohio State because he wants to help Ohio State try to win a national championship, whatever that role might look like, then it's great for Ohio State if you can say like, hey, who's one of your backup safeties? Like, oh, it's a guy who started for 3 years at Syracuse and was pretty productive. Like, that's awesome. But I'm somewhat on alert for after spring practice ends, Jihad Carter taking a survey of the landscape and thinking that maybe it could be worth looking elsewhere just to get on the field for what I assume is his last year as a college player. And I definitely wouldn't fault him for that. But and if that did happen, then that does put a little bit of a dent, I think, in Ohio State's safety depth, because while the starters look like they're going to be really good, and then I guess you can like if you count it as 4 starters with Caleb Downs, Lathan Ransom, Jordan Hancock, and Sonny Styles, right? Like that's probably as good as anybody has, and better than almost everyone else, or maybe better than everyone else. But then it gets really young, I think, after that. It's like Malik Hartford and a bunch of guys who haven't played really ever if you end up losing Jihad Carter. So I'd be interested in what Ohio State might do to try to address that if that comes to pass. But maybe they'll get lucky and Jihad Carter will be happy to just contribute to winning in Columbus, whatever that needs to look like for
him. There's also a new guy in charge of that group, and in the flood of news, I'm not sure that we actually spent a ton of time talking about the Perry Eliano decision specifically for Ryan Day, and then a pretty quick move to bring Matt Guerreri back into the fold for Jim Knowles.
Yeah, we didn't talk about it much. We'll see, like on the recruiting piece, right? I think I guess maybe at the time it happened, I thought a lot of it was recruiting related, but I feel a little differently now. I just maybe feel like Ryan Day thought that spot wasn't getting maximized. Even if the safeties did play really well last year, there was maybe something missing there that he felt like could have been a little bit better. So we'll see about Matt Guerreri on the recruiting trail, and that matters tremendously. I'm not trying to dismiss that, or diminish that, but from like a football standpoint and like on the field and within this defense, I think it puts Ohio State in a much better spot to have a position coach that has known Jim Knowles a long time, has been an assistant in this system previously, and then like kind of ran the system himself when he was the defensive coordinator at Duke and did it pretty well. So whatever room there is, I guess, to really reach the ceiling with this group, and I don't think they're too far off from it. I do think bringing in someone like Matt Guerreri with that familiarity in the scheme, with the ability maybe to tap into some different things that Ohio State necessarily hasn't gotten into yet, can help the safety group make up whatever little bit of ground there is to go from like really, really good to like great / elite.
That move from Ryan Day to part ways with Perry Eliano, it did resonate a bit to me as like, if I'm talking about maximizing opportunities over and over and over, and I'm sure everyone listening is tired of hearing me say that on the podcast daily at this point, but you could have easily made a case if you were Ryan Day that like safety play pretty good, like definitely not a weakness for one of the best defenses in the country. Josh Proctor got better, then Lathan Ransom got hurt, and like you could easily make some excuses for that or rationalize, hey, he's doing this, maybe the recruiting is not perfect, but that's okay. But that's how you wind up in the Greg Studrawa sort of paradox. Like, yes, one part of this is really good. Are you willing to sacrifice all the other just because you are afraid of what would happen if you have to make a change? Are you willing to accept less than 100% because you're not sure if you can do better than 85%? And Ryan Day said, well, Matt Guerreri, not sure if he's absolutely going to be a better recruiter than Perry Eliano, but if that wasn't already his strength, then that isn't a negative to bringing somebody who may be more proven in Jim Knowles' system, more familiar with it, a good developer of safeties and an understanding of that position. If you're going to squeeze out a little bit more and then bank on him being able to recruit, I thought that was a good sign that maybe Ryan Day was grasping some of the things that I was talking about. Not that I was talking to him about that directly, but like I thought that went down as encouraging without knowing for sure how it's going to work out.
I think Ryan Day listens to the Daily. He picked up on what messages you were putting out there. No, I agree, and I think I don't mean for this to turn into like let's rag on Perry Eliano because I thought he did mostly a pretty good job here, but he also like wasn't really a safeties coach by trade, right? And now you have a safeties coach there, and Matt Guerreri, who's done it for a number of years and done it in this system, and even if that's means you're only going to be 5 or 10% better. And maybe maybe it's even less than that, you're still better. And I don't have much of an issue with making a change to try to get yourself to that point.
Yeah. And that's that. I mean, you are supposed to be BIA. Like that's what they're expecting. And if they were a rung or two short from that, you got to figure out how to get to that point. Matt Guerreri and Caleb Downs are obviously going to be pretty key parts of that puzzle.
Mostly Caleb Downs, but yeah, Matt, we'll Matt Guerreri in there.
Well, I didn't say it was even. We can determine how much weight to give to each one, but you're right. It is definitely going to be Caleb Downs, and that's really I'm looking forward to seeing what that looks like once practice starts there on that first Tuesday in March, which is coming up very quickly. Which is why we're into the second installment of our position previews on the podcast daily. That's the safeties. We got a lot more to come as we roll along defensively for the rest of, well, we got one more day this week, a Freaky Friday. Do we want to do a mailbag or are we going to do linebackers? What should we do?
I think we should do a mailbag.
Mailbag. All right.
Yeah.
So 614-662-4509. If you are already a Subtext subscriber, send us a note there. We'll get into the mailbag on a Freaky Friday. And if you're new, you can try it for 14 days on us for free, and you can cancel at any time and you'll never get charged. I think that's how it works. That's my understanding. Doug is way better at that pitch than me, but those are the details. So hit us up with some questions. Bill and I will get into those on our last Bermless, the podcast daily this week as his vacation winds down, and we move another week closer to the start of spring ball and March. Thanks for joining us on the podcast daily. That's been for Thursday. That man is Bill Landis. I'm Austin Ward. We'll talk to you later.